Hey y'all, it's Maya J, and I am here with the one and only Mrs. Get You Together. And
God's hunting.
Oh God. But we are so excited because we're doing something a little different today. Clearly, I am your host for the one and only Come Sit Down, Let's Talk, the first ever where we are interviewing Miss Get You Together. Y'all, this has never been done before. So at the end of the day, I already let her know we're getting all in her business.
Is you ready?
I'm ready. Are y'all ready?
Because I'm going to give it to you.
We want it raw, uncut, unfiltered, all that and then some. All right, so you ready?
I'm ready. I got you.
So our conversation today is going to be centered around transitions. We are all experiencing a transition within our life. Everyone has done this along this journey, this process, whether it's from work, from relationships, basically just going from one place to the next. So what I want to know, we're going to get started with this, is what's the biggest transition you have had to go through in your life? The biggest.
So I think it's twofold. So my biggest natural transition, I feel, was moving from Florida to Georgia. So in 2008, my kid's father decided he wanted to move to Georgia to get to know his family. So we uprooted everything and moved to Georgia. And that was such a big transition because, like, if my father had still been living, I would have never entertained it. But my dad had passed away 3 years prior. So it forced me to no longer be daddy's little girl, but to grow up. So I was like, okay. Also, our marriage was in a bad place.
Interesting.
So this was we're starting over.
We're going to try this thing again.
Yeah.
Okay. So how did you feel? What was you going through or experiencing in that space from moving from, here you are, this Georgia girl, and moving into this other space? How did you feel? Let's go into that.
So I was terrified. Like, I had never lived anywhere besides Florida. Like, the closest I've come to moving somewhere else was Orange Park.
Yeah. Down the street.
We know that ain't
Right.
that ain't
Down the
no-
street.
So moving to Georgia, one, I was afraid. I was terrified in some spaces because I was there. I had family in Georgia, but they were like Georgia, and we were in Valdosta, so there was no one who could get to me quick. Like, I would often say, like, if I needed $20, there's no one here I could call to ask.
Yeah.
So that was a hard space to be in, coming from a big family. Like, I'm the 15th child.
Whew, you don't hear that now.
I know.
You don't hear that now.
Yes. And so coming from a big family, being in a space where there's no one, but in the back of my mind, I think I was still hopeful that, okay, so we're going to try it in a different state. Maybe things will be different.
Yeah.
When we moved there to start a ministry.
Right.
So we started a ministry, and for about 6 months, like, life was really, really looking good. I was like, ooh.
This was what we needed to do.
Yes, ministry growing, kids getting acclimated in school. We were around his family that lived there, and then it was as if it all came crashing down. And at that moment, I was like, I don't even know what to do.
So now you're going into another space of transition.
Another space of transition. We were staying in a small town called Adel, Georgia. When everything started crashing, we moved from Adel and we moved to Valdosta. That's how we ended up in Valdosta. So that was another transition. And at that time, my ex-husband had gotten into some trouble, so he was going to jail. So here it is. I'm in a state I feel like I'm by myself.
Right.
Now in the home, I feel like by myself.
With my children.
With my children,
By myself.
by myself. In a city where I really don't know people. I don't know why, because I'm such a connection person, but I never wanted to connect there.
In hindsight, why do you feel like that was, like, now that we can look back on it, do you feel like there was a reason behind your lack of connection with that city and with those people in that city?
I think it was resentment.
That's good.
I think I felt like, okay, I was here. Like, things were not good, but I at least had a good career.
Yeah.
I at least had, where if I was in trouble, I could call somebody and they could come help me. And you uprooted my children and you moved us somewhere, and then you became that same person
That you were when we were over here.
because even though the scene changed, the person did.
That's a big thing.
So I think resentment. And so I was in a dark place, and it's like everything about that place was dark. It was like, okay, so it was dark because my marriage was ending. It was dark because Victoria had become a teen mom. It was dark because I was under a Department of Children and Family investigation. It was dark because Victoria had been expelled from school. I mean, everything about it was dark. And then it felt like we were in this dark capsule.
Yeah.
And I couldn't see my way out. Like it was so dark for me that I wanted to die. Like, I remember drinking alcohol, taking pain pills, and muscle relaxers.
Yeah.
Together. In hopes that I would transition.
No longer be present with us.
No.
Not be able to experience this even conversation today.
No. Like,
That's how dark of a
that's
place
how
you
dark
were
it
in.
was. I couldn't see past the pain and the hurt that I was feeling. And regardless to how I was feeling, I still had people pulling. And not being able to say to somebody, I'm empty.
Right.
I don't have anything to give you. Like, I'm broken. Not having that space. And I remember and it was like multiple times that I would do it. And I remember the last time I woke up and I was like, so you really not gonna let me die? This is being God's conversation. I'm like, so you really not gonna let me die? Like, so you gonna hold me captive here? And so I said, okay, so since you not gonna let me die, I'm going to help others get through what no one helped me through.
Now let's go there. Because you said a lot. I want to know, and I'm sure others want to know, how did you transition? Yes, you had the thought that said, I want to help people, but really walk us through what that transition looked like from being in a dark place, from contemplating and attempting suicide, from really feeling like there is no way out, where you said before you were a hopeful person. So for you to move in the first place was because you had hope. But then along the lines, that hope died.
Yes.
That hope was no longer present, and you are now in that dark place. Outside of physically everything around you, let's tap into spiritually and emotionally what happened that allowed for you to transition from darkness to light.
So around 2011, I backslid. It was for the first time I felt I was spiritually broken. Like, even during those times I felt emotionally broken and mentally broken, I still had like that glimmer of hope in my spirit. But it was when Victoria got pregnant, and like, people, when I say this, they laugh because we literally got excommunicated out the church. Like,
Yo.
like, they literally filed paperwork with the
Not the paperwork.
they filed paperwork said that if we were to come to church, we would be arrested for trespassing.
Not the church.
The church.
You had me at the paperwork, but keep going.
So I'm like, how you go from pastoring a church
Leading to getting kicked out of the church with the paperwork.
with paperwork? So I was like, this is crazy. So I stopped liking anything church related. But one thing I never did was stop my children from going. So even when I backslid,
Yes.
I would still get up because they've always participated in church, so I would take them to church on Sundays.
Church.
Yes, I would take them to church on Sunday. Hey, y'all call your girl when you're ready to come home. I'll come
Yeah.
get you, and stuff like that. So I had the mitigated goals.
So you at the house, you didn't prep the kids, got their Sunday's best on, and you home.
and they
Call me when you ready.
call me when you're ready.
Okay.
I never in a million years would have imagined I would
You.
be that person.
Pastor.
Yes. And it was funny because the other day I read a post. You know how Facebook is petty and
They
it
be
brings
giving you
your
the memories.
I'm like, did you really say that about church people on Facebook? Like, I
What you
didn't even
said?
like church people. I think it was like your title don't exempt you from being nice or something like that. And
So you was hurt. It was that hurt.
It was because like I literally my mama went in labor on her way to church. So I had been to church all my life.
Literally your whole life.
Literally. And at no point had I ever thought that I would make a vow to say, oh, I ain't going back to church ever. So to find myself there, it was odd. And so at this time we're separated, and I'm learning how to live life alone because I got married at 19. So my entire adulthood, like I had never even lived
You ain't had no life.
alone.
Yes.
Like I was like, what am I?
19.
19. I went from my father's house to my
your
husband's
husband's
house.
house.
So to be in a space where now you got to figure out house, like I'm like, this is odd to me.
Yeah.
So in that transition, I remember being at a broken state, but I would still hear God. Like me and the Lord, we've always had that
Relationship with
where
one
He
another.
talks to me.
Yes.
And so I would still hear Him talk to me, and I would still have a whole attitude talking back to Him. That's why
in the bed.
Yes, that's why I tell people, God is not intimidated by your feelings.
He's not.
So you don't have to try to hide who you are or what you're feeling. So taking the kids, making the vow, and I remember one Sunday morning, one Coach Erica Roberts, who is a part of Embrace, me and her went to college together because that was the one thing I did do when I was in Georgia. I went back to college.
That's a blessing.
And I remember messaging her and saying, I really want to go to church, but I can't go to any of these churches. And so she invited me to come to church. She said, just come and sit in the back. I was like, all right, I can do that. So I dropped the kids off, and then I went
At their church.
At their church. And then I went and I sat in the back, and I was like, okay, this is all right. So I would go and sit in the back on some Sundays or what have you. Whenever the kids would have things, they'd be like, Mama, would you come to church? And I would go and support them. So I think that was like my breaking of, I ain't never going back to church to, I just at least want to be in the presence.
Yeah.
So that was that transition. I remember when the Lord told me to go ahead and move back to Florida. I remember Him saying, you're no longer spiritually bleeding. So when you go back, don't allow anybody to contaminate you. He said, it's when the blood stops flowing that you are most susceptible to be contaminated.
When the blood stops flowing.
In the blood, there are antibodies.
Yes, go there.
That prevents infection from setting in. And then it's when the blood stops that you are most susceptible to getting an infection. I was like, I know that had to be God because I hate everything medical.
I was gonna say the way my mind worked, I'm not putting all of them together, okay?
Yes.
But it was so specific.
It was specific. And I was like, okay, I don't know what to do with that, but okay. So that was like the cracking of the ice.
Yeah.
And I feel like from there, me and God started getting an understanding. Before I knew him out of a place of fear, but backsliding and coming back, I learned him out of a place of love.
Right. So from that point, you were able to extend the love that you were receiving to everyone who was involved within that transition space.
And not just the love, but also the grace. Because when we deal out of fear, grace doesn't abide.
All right, so you just said something really big, and I just feel like we have to expand upon it. You said that when you transitioned into a space where you were able to experience God's love and experience God's grace, that you also in turn were able to extend that same love, that same grace to others. So we've had a number of conversations. We talking good, okay? Every time we talking good. So I remember that there was a space where you were telling me and others about your past marriage and the hurt that you experienced, the pain that you experienced. I want to know, and I'm sure others would love to know, how you were able to extend that grace, extend that love to the very person that hurt you. How that's a transition.
It is. I remember riding in the car one day and I heard the Lord say, accept, acknowledge, and adjust. So going from per se the pulpit to being in the club to being having sex while still married, like being in a space of walking away from the checklist of how to live right. You know, for so long I was, I don't do this, I don't do this, I don't do this, I don't do that. So now I don't have that. So thinking, because I've done all these things, God don't love me. God doesn't, he gonna get me. Like, if I die right now, I'm going to hell. You know, but in the process, I could still see how his hand was still on my life. In so many situations, like, not just, this happened. I'm like, no, major things are happening. Like things that I had to point it to God. And looking and seeing that grace, I was like, okay, so he really loved me.
I feel how you finna go there.
Yeah, even in spite of me not loving him enough to stay in that relationship that we have. But truth of the matter is, I had a relationship with church and not Christ. So hearing the Lord say, accept, acknowledge, adjust, I was like, what does that mean?
Right.
So I remember one of my best friends in Georgia, she had asked, she said, so you think you over him? Because I had endured so many things in the marriage.
Right.
And I was so hurt, but I felt like I was supposed to be hurt because I endured so much in the marriage.
Right.
Like, I wore it as a badge. Yeah.
Pin that.
So I was, she said, you think you're, I'm like, yeah. She said, when you talk about it, do it still hurt? I was like,
right, I don't really know. Sometimes it depends.
I'm like, yes, I'm supposed to be hurt. So that was when I was the,
Yes.
yeah. So in that, that perplexed my soul.
Yes.
Because where I thought I was okay,
Yes.
I realized I really wasn't. And it was at that moment I wanted to start the journey to really be okay.
Yes.
So, God extended the grace for me to begin the healing process and gave me the tools to do so with the 3 A's.
Right.
Accept, acknowledge, adjust.
Yes.
So it was accept that something has to change.
Yeah.
If you continue the way you are, things are going to stay the way they are. Acknowledging that you could have did things differently. Now
Yes.
that was the hard part, because leaving year 19 was a challenge because I was going into a life I never knew.
Yeah.
But knowing that the same power I had to leave at year 19, I had at year 1, but I chose to stay.
Yeah.
That shifted my view of myself from being a victim to being a participant. And I had extended myself grace. So if I wasn't going to be mad at myself for staying, I couldn't be mad at him.
Yeah.
So knowing that people can only do to you what you allow them to do, knowing that I allowed him and fortified him the opportunity to hurt me,
Right.
changed the narrative in my life. So at that moment, I began to think about my journey to forgiveness.
Right.
Because if I wasn't mad at me, then I don't have the right to be mad at him.
That's maturity. That's maturity.
And then adjust. My adjust was moving from Georgia back to Florida, which was just the thought process was challenging.
Yeah.
So having to experience God's love and his grace, like, it made me see people differently, where I didn't see people as a checklist.
Right.
Because I no longer could, I didn't have the right to see people as a checklist. Because it was my fall from grace that showed me grace.
Right.
So having that transition, and being able to text my ex and say, hey, I didn't do it all right.
Yes.
And I want to apologize. Do you know?
That's big.
But it was so liberating.
Yes. Because you had acknowledged your part in it all.
Yes.
And because of that, you were able to be honest and be accountable for the things that you did within that marriage.
Yes. Because it was, again, checklist. I ain't do this. I ain't do that.
Yeah. I could have did this. I should have did that. I know that probably was a thought too.
Absolutely. But I did allow him to do it. It's like you guilty by association.
Very much so.
And when I viewed myself in that way, then I could really do the forgiveness work.
Yeah.
And that transition allowed me to be free to love again.
Yes. Let's just let that all sit in. You said so much. You keep saying so much, and I feel like we gotta have a whole nother episode.
Let's do it.
But I do want to wrap us up with the fact that the biggest thing that you said, in order to extend grace, to extend love, you had to first get to a place where you were able to do that for yourself before you were able to do it for someone else. Before you were able to go there with your husband, you had to go through that process with Miss Mechelle.
Yes. Look, I had to go through that process with Shell.
Yeah, Shell. You were Shell then. You were Shell then.
And Shell a mess.
That's why she misses get you together. I hope you all enjoyed the first segment of this. Was a real talk, y'all. We have more to come at Come Sit Down, Let's Talk, where we're interviewing the one and only Mrs. Get You Together. Bye, y'all.